The man was halfway through arguing with his recycler unit about expired nutrient paste when he heard the sound behind the habitat, something between a cough and an insult. He froze, holding a sealed food packet like evidence of a crime he hadn't committed yet. The outpost rules were clear about wildlife, alien or otherwise. Do not feed it, do not touch it, and absolutely do not adopt it. The sound came again, sharper this time, followed by a small shape tumbling out from behind a stack of heat-scorched crates. It tried to stand. It failed. It hissed at him with all the authority of a ruler addressing a peasant, though it was clearly starving. She looked almost human, which somehow made things worse. Too familiar to dismiss, too strange to understand. Long ears swept back from her head, twitching like they were arguing among themselves. She stared at the food packet in his hand with naked fury, as if offended he hadn't offered it sooner. The man sighed the sigh of someone who knew his life was about to become inconvenient. He crouched, slid the packet across the dust, and stepped back, muttering that this was absolutely not kindness, just poor judgment. The cub pounced on it with terrifying speed, tearing into the seal and chewing with intense concentration, pausing only to glare at him between bites, crumbs clinging to her chin like a badge of dishonor. "Slow down," he said, then realized how ridiculous it was to give dietary advice to an alien being who might one day dissolve him at the molecular level. She ignored him completely. When the packet was empty, she sniffed the air, climbed onto his boot without permission, and sat there as if claiming territory. The man stared at the stars overhead, already calculating how much trouble this would cause. He lived on a planet where automated drones reported unusual heat signatures and unusual behavior, and this was definitely both. Over the next few days, the cub returned without invitation, appearing whenever he cooked, slept, or attempted to pretend this wasn't happening. She followed him inside, explored his habitat with judgmental snorts, and learned how to open storage compartments faster than he did. She clearly understood far more than she said, which at first was nothing except one insult-sounding noise she repeated whenever his cooking displeased her. He learned to lock the door. She learned to override the lock. He accused her of cheating. She smiled, which unsettled him more than the teeth. At night, distant ships burned through the sky, and the outpost feeds whispered about purges, vanished caravans, and species erased for political efficiency. The cub listened when those reports played, very still, ears lowered. He offered her food anyway, joked about how she'd better grow up and pay rent someday. She didn't laugh, but she stayed. And without meaning to, the man kept the door closed to the universe and open to something far more dangerous. The idea that mercy, once given, could not be taken back. By the end of the first week, the man accepted two things as unchangeable laws of the universe. The cub was not leaving, and she was absolutely judging him. She followed him through the habitat like a small, sharp shadow, silent except when she disapproved. Disapproval was frequent. His chair was wrong. His sleep schedule was insulting. His idea of seasoning food bordered on criminal. She communicated these opinions through narrowed eyes, ear twitches, and once, memorably, by pushing his plate onto the floor and sitting on it. He tried not to name her. Naming things made them permanent, and he was still clinging to the fantasy that this situation would resolve itself without authorities, explosions, or interstellar consequences. She made this difficult by responding when he spoke, tilting her head at certain words, repeating others in a distorted echo as if tasting language. When he said food, she appeared instantly. When he said danger, she listened. When he said don't touch that, she touched it harder. The outpost sensors began acting strangely. His door logs showed entries without openings. Power fluctuations followed her moods with suspicious accuracy. One evening, after she caused his gravity stabilizer to hiccup, sending both of them briefly floating while she laughed and he screamed, he realized she wasn't just intelligent. She was advanced, terrifyingly so. He considered reporting her. Then she curled up against the heating unit and slept, ears relaxed, fingers loosely clutching the sleeve of his jacket like an anchor. He didn't report anything. Information came in fragments. She mimicked words from the news feeds, repeating names of systems that no longer existed. When images of burning vessels appeared, she turned away. When officials spoke of necessary extinction events, she hissed softly, a sound he now recognized as grief. He pieced together what he could. Her people were powerful, feared, and currently being dismantled by alliances that believed mercy was inefficiency. She was supposed to be dead. Instead, she was here, stealing his socks and rearranging his tools by some alien logic he could not begin to understand. He taught her small things: how to hold a cup without cracking it, why doors were polite inventions, why threatening the recycler unit was pointless. She taught him larger ones without meaning to, how silence could be strategic, how fear could be controlled, how laughter, hers sharp and sudden, could break tension better than weapons. When he burned dinner, she laughed. When he burned it again, she laughed harder. When he succeeded once, she looked disappointed. Drones began passing closer. Ships lingered longer in orbit. He joked about needing a bigger freezer to hide her in. She stared at him, unblinking, then shook her head slowly as if correcting a child. One night she placed her palm against his chest, eyes bright, ears lifted, and spoke clearly for the first time. Not a sentence, a claim, something old and binding. The habitat lights flickered in response. He didn't understand the words. He understood the weight of them, and somewhere beyond the stars something noticed. The ships arrived quietly, which was how truly dangerous things always arrived. The man noticed the silence first. No trade chatter on the local band. No automated greetings from passing traffic. Not even the usual static hum of distant engines. The cub noticed before that. She went still, ears lifting, body tense in a way he had only seen once before, when the news feeds showed her people burning. She climbed onto the table and looked at him with an expression that made his stomach drop. It was not fear, it was calculation. He tried humor because that was what he did when reality leaned too close. "If this is about the socks," he said lightly, "I was going to wash them." She did not react. Instead, she moved with sudden purpose, activating systems he didn't know existed, panels sliding open in the walls as if the habitat itself recognized her authority. Symbols bloomed across the air in layered light, alien and precise. He stared, vaguely offended that his home had secrets it hadn't shared with him. When the knock came, it was not a knock. It was a presence. The door didn't open so much as surrender. 3 figures stood outside, tall and severe, their forms wrapped in living armor that shifted like restrained storms. They looked almost human too, if one ignored the eyes that reflected too much light and the absolute certainty in their posture. One of them spoke his name without asking who he was. Another addressed the cub with a title that bent the air slightly as it passed. The man considered fainting, decided it would be embarrassing, and stayed upright out of spite. They declared her recovered property. They listed laws older than his species. They explained, with chilling politeness, that mercy was a flaw she had been exposed to and must now unlearn. The man opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, because arguing with ancient conquerors in his own kitchen felt like a bad plan. The cub stepped forward instead. She placed herself between him and them, small but immovable, and spoke in a voice that made the habitat shudder. What followed sounded like a legal debate conducted with weapons-grade vocabulary. Ancient codes were invoked. Bloodlines cited. A right of protection, rarely used and deeply inconvenient, was claimed. The figures hesitated. One looked at the man as if noticing him for the first time, expression flickering between curiosity and irritation. The man waved weakly. "Hi, I make terrible food," he offered, unsure why. In the end, they took her anyway. That had always been inevitable, but they did not take him. She turned back once, ears high, eyes bright with something dangerously close to amusement. She touched his chest again briefly and spoke a single word. The figures stiffened at it. Then they were gone, ships vanishing as silently as they arrived. The outpost returned to noise. The man stood alone in his kitchen, surrounded by broken panels and crumbs that would never be complained about again. He cleaned slowly, muttering that this was why he avoided helping strangers. Far above, a future shifted course, and the galaxy learned too late that kindness, once introduced, was a contaminant that spread. Time passed in the way it always did when nothing exploded, slowly, stubbornly, and with paperwork. The man filled out incident reports that no one read, repaired panels that insisted they had never been broken, and returned to arguing with the recycler unit, which now refused to accept anything labeled emergency. The habitat felt larger without her, emptier in a way that could not be fixed by moving furniture or pretending he preferred silence. He told himself this was good. Quiet was safe. Quiet did not summon fleets. The galaxy disagreed. News feeds began slipping into his evenings like unwanted guests. He watched while eating meals that tasted worse than usual, which he blamed on the absence of judgmental stares. Entire systems changed hands overnight. Alliances fractured. An unfamiliar name surfaced again and again, spoken with caution and awe. A rising figure among an ancient species thought to be collapsing, known for victories that ended too cleanly, too mercifully. Commanders surrendered to her because she let them live. Politicians feared her because she listened. Analysts called her rule inefficient and therefore terrifying. He scoffed, mostly at himself. He had once believed the cub would grow into trouble. Apparently she had chosen scale instead. Years layered themselves on him. His hair grayed. His joints complained. The outpost upgraded everything except its sense of humor. New settlers arrived, left, returned older and louder. He became a fixture, a man who knew which systems to kick and which to apologize to. When people asked why he never left, he joked that he was waiting for the galaxy to calm down. Sometimes, late at night, he swore the lights flickered the way they had when she laughed. Sometimes he dreamed of long ears and sharp smiles, of a small hand gripping his sleeve as if anchoring reality. He woke up annoyed at himself for sentimentality and made coffee strong enough to discourage memory. It didn't work. The feeds grew louder. That name gained a title, then several. Then one that made commentators whisper and military channels go silent. Empress. He laughed out loud at that, a short bark of disbelief that startled the cleaning drone. Of course, he said to no one. Why not? The image that accompanied the announcement froze him mid-sip, almost human, long ears, eyes bright with something familiar and unsettling. He stared until the drone gently asked him to blink. The message that arrived days later was not dramatic. No fanfare. Just coordinates, a timestamp, and a priority flag that made his terminal sweat. He considered ignoring it. He considered pretending he was busy. He considered, briefly, hiding in the recycler. Instead, he straightened his jacket, told the habitat not to collapse while he was gone, and stepped outside as the sky began to darken with approaching ships. The sky did not so much darken as surrender. Ships folded out of nothing, vast and precise, arranging themselves with ceremonial restraint above the outpost. The man watched with his hands in his pockets, because at his age panic felt like unnecessary cardio. Drones fled. Sensors screamed. Someone somewhere attempted to issue an evacuation order and gave up halfway through the sentence. A ramp descended from the largest vessel, light spilling out in a color his eyes refused to categorize. She walked down alone. Time had not softened her. It had refined her. She still looked almost human, still carried those long ears that marked her as other, but now every step bent attention toward her like gravity. Armor flowed over her body like a second intention, alive with symbols that made the air hum. When she reached the ground, the galaxy seemed to inhale and wait. The man squinted. "You're late," he said, "and you never wrote." Her mouth curved, sharp and familiar. "You age poorly," she replied, voice layered with harmonics that made nearby officers flinch. "Your hair is surrendering." "Rude," he said, relieved enough to complain. "I fed you, I deserve respect." She dismissed the guards with a gesture that could have ended civilizations. They retreated instantly, confused and terrified. She stepped closer, studying him as if recalibrating an old equation. "You kept your word," she said. "You stayed." "I didn't have anywhere better," he admitted. "Also, I'm stubborn." That apparently was amusing. She laughed, not the sharp cub sound, but something deeper, controlled, and dangerously sincere. The air steadied. Systems across the fleet adjusted as if responding to her mood. She told him what followed after she was taken: purges interrupted, doctrines challenged, elders silenced by their own laws. Mercy, introduced like a virus, spreading. Her rise had not been inevitable. It had been chosen because of him. She offered him planets, influence, a place at her side. Advisors watched in silent horror as he declined all of it, asking instead if she'd eaten properly and whether empresses slept at all. She blinked, then answered honestly. "Not enough," she said, "and no." "Figures," he muttered. "You were always bad at resting." She leaned down then, long ears lowering, and rested her forehead briefly against his. The galaxy pretended not to see. "I came back," she said softly, "because you taught me something impossible." He smiled, tired and real. "You still owe me rent." The galaxy adjusted, slowly and with visible reluctance. Treaties were rewritten in languages that had never included the word mercy before. Borders softened, not because fleets withdrew, but because they no longer needed to arrive. The Empress ruled from a moving throne world that drifted between systems like a thinking moon. Yet she returned often to the small outpost that barely appeared on official maps. Each visit caused mild panic, several resignations, and one memorable attempt by a junior officer to salute a food dispenser. The man aged the way planets did, quietly, with cracks filled by stories. He no longer argued with the recycler unit. It had learned its place. He hosted diplomats who did not understand why the most powerful being in known space insisted on sitting on the floor of his kitchen, eating poorly seasoned food, and listening to him complain about his knees. She listened anyway. She always did. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she corrected galactic policy between bites, and sometimes she simply existed there, long ears relaxed, eyes less burdened than before. Her empire endured because it bent. Former enemies became administrators. Conquered worlds became allies who told strange legends about a human who had fed a starving child and accidentally destabilized eternity. The Empress never corrected those stories. She knew the truth was smaller and therefore stronger. She had not been saved by power but by being seen. The man changed too, though he insisted he hadn't. He no longer pretended the universe was simple. He no longer believed kindness was safe. He understood now that small choices were the most dangerous forces known, capable of outlasting weapons and rewriting futures. And yet when travelers arrived hungry, he still fed them. When frightened things hid behind his walls, he still opened the door. Growth, it turned out, did not mean becoming harder. On her final visit before leaving the galaxy to govern from farther than light could follow, she knelt beside him and placed a small device in his hand. Not a weapon, not a crown, a beacon tuned only to her. "For emergencies," she said. He snorted. "You mean loneliness." She smiled unashamed. "Yes." When she left, the sky returned to its ordinary color. The outpost hummed. Life continued. The man sat on his steps, watching stars that no longer felt distant, and ate a meal that was still badly seasoned. Somewhere, an empress ruled 1,000 worlds differently because of him. He finished eating, wiped his hands, and went back inside, leaving the door unlocked, just in case the universe needed kindness again.